Welcome to today's session of the Overview webinar series. My name is Dimple and I'm the servant leader at INDICA Courses, a pioneering INDICA EdTech enterprise in the Indian knowledge systems domain. We are one of the many interventions by INDIC Academy or INDICA in the service of Indian knowledge systems. INDICA is an institute dedicated to Indic knowledge traditions and cultural heritage. We envision a world where the wisdom and practices of these traditions are integrated into everyday life, providing solutions for individual well-being and happiness, as well as promoting global peace and sustainability. Our goal is to facilitate seekers' journey in discovering their identity, finding their purpose, and nurturing their potential by enabling access to these valuable traditions. At INDICA Courses, we create and curate online and offline courses and workshops across multiple disciplines of IKS for lifelong learners who share our belief in the transformative power of timeless indigenous wisdom. To know more about our work and offerings, please visit our website, indica.courses. A cursory glance at our catalog will reveal a plethora of courses across various streams of knowledge open for enrollment. Leadership lessons from the Vedas, leadership lessons from the Puranas, leadership lessons from the Shastras, Sanskrit for beginners, and an introduction to Sri Vidya worship are some of our other cohort or live courses open for enrollment. You can also enroll into our self-paced course Rituals and Wellbeing, Exploring the Scientific Connection. We welcome you to go through our course catalog on indica.courses and enroll, gift, and recommend the same. You can also bookmark our website for your easy reference and follow us on social media to stay updated about our ongoing and upcoming courses. The Overview webinar series has been created as an interface for prospective learners to understand what a particular INDICA course would offer so that they make an informed enrollment decision. We have organized a number of such sessions in the last many months, and you can watch the recordings thereof on INDIC Academy's YouTube channel. We shall share the link of the same with you for your reference and further dissemination. The recording of this evening's overview webinar will be emailed to everyone who registered for the event. This evening's webinar is about our upcoming INDICA course, Introduction to Śrī Madhvācārya Life and Works. This INDICA course provides an introductory overview of the life and works of Śrī Madhvācārya, the founder of Dvaita School of Vedānta. It covers significant events in his life, narrates contexts for his works, and presents an outline of the fundamental principles of his teachings. The course begins from the 13th of June, and live sessions will be conducted on our portal every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. The recording of every session will be made available on our portal within 72 hours of the class. In this manner, you can not only revise or refresh your learning later, but if you miss any live session for any reason, you can watch the recording and catch up. There's a discussion forum on the course page of the portal that is meant for discussing the content of the class, posting your comments or queries, and the faculty then addresses the same either there or in the next live session. Before I invite our wonderful faculty, Dr. Sri V, to take us through this overview session, I would like to introduce him to you. Dr. Sri has been a student of the Dvaita School of Vedānta for more than 2 decades, studying under various traditional scholars and Swamijis. He's passionate about manuscriptology and has edited more than 10 unpublished manuscripts belonging to the Dvaita tradition, including Vanamali Mishra's Gita Gurdartha Chandrika, Kantara Rama, Swarna Manjari, and Vedagarbha Narayan's Bhashyartha Manjari. Works edited by him have been published by various research institutes and mathas. Professionally, Dr. Sri holds an MBBS from Bangalore Medical College and a PhD in Public Policy from IIM Bangalore. His research interests include epistemology of medical systems, integrative medicine, medical education, knowledge translation, respectful maternity care, and health policy and systems research. Dr. Sri is also a founding member of Pune Pramati, an alternative school in Bangalore that aims to integrate Indic knowledge systems with mainstream education. He is actively involved in research and publication activities of Udupi Sri Bhandarakeri Matha. This is the faculty who will be taking you through the wonderful course that we have curated from the 13th of June. I request Sri Ji, the very erudite Sri Ji, as you would have guessed from the profile that I read out, to let us know all about this unique INDICA course and what can the learners expect to learn from it. Over to you, Sri Ji.
Thank you very much, Nipal Ji, for that kind introduction. Thanks for all the participants. I'm quite happy to see the number of registrations for this course. We'll try to get an overview of what we are trying to do in this course. So let me begin with an invocation. Lakshmi Narayano Vande Tayoryo Bhaktimattamaha Srimad Ananda Tirthakhyo Gurustam Chanamamyaham Sriman Madhvācārya Padapadmaika Sadmanam Anunam Mahatam Chapi Bhavatai Karunam Shri Gurupyam. Okay. So the plan for the next probably around 40 minutes, then we can have some question answers after that. So I intend to talk about the course objectives and outcomes. Probably we'll talk about the outcomes at the end and start with the objectives to begin with, and then situate Śrī Madhvācārya's philosophy in the broader philosophical texts domain, and then talk about Ācāryas' works, an overview, the tenets of the Madhva school. So this is obviously going to be an overview of the things that are expected to be discussed over the 15 hours of the course that we are planning. So I'll situate these in the plan that we have for the next 15 hours when we start the program, and a brief overview of Śrī Madhvācārya's life and how we try to juxtapose the tenets, the works, and his life. And a quick comment on the reading list and what you can expect from the course. So that's the broad plan that I have for today's discussion. Okay, so the objective, as you can guess from the title of the course, is to understand the life of Śrī Madhvācārya, some of the important events in his biographical details, then specifically look at a few events that have a direct link to the context in which his works were composed, right? And then look at some of the selected texts from two perspectives. One is to summarize the basic ideas of those texts and also try to look at the fundamental philosophical teachings that are embedded in these texts. So that's the broad objective for the course. Okay, now why are we interested in understanding Śrī Madhvācārya's life and work? So what's the popular understanding, and what is it that you will probably get to know more in this course? So that's what I'll try to explain over the next 15 minutes, and then we'll come to his works and tenets a little later. So these are some of the details that you may be aware of when we say, okay, trying to look at Madhvācārya and his school. There are certain things that are popularly known. He is the founder of Dvaita School of Vedānta, one of the Vaishnavite Vedantic schools. I'll talk about that a little in detail a little later. So then we also know about the Udupi Krishna temple, a quite popular one from coastal Karnataka, one which was installed by Śrī Madhvācārya, and the tradition, Śrī Madhva's tradition, continues the worshipping of the title and management of the matha there. The third, probably well known in the southern Indian region, and probably somewhat similar to the bhakti movement in the northern Indian regions, is the Haridasa movement in Karnataka, and a little bit in the Telangana and Andhra Pradesh region, which is basically the Bhakti Dasa Sahitya literature. So popularly the Purandara Dasa, Kanakadasa, and such Haridasas. So they get the inspiration from the Madhva tradition. In fact, they talk about the principles that Śrī Madhvācārya has taught. So they have tried to position those teachings in Kannada language and written these poems and the Kannada Dasa Sahitya. So that draws the inspiration primarily from Śrī Madhvācārya, and this is quite popular in the southern region here. And the Gaudiya tradition of Bengal, especially a few works like those of Sri Baladeva Vidyabhushana, directly attribute their learnings to the Madhva tradition. So those are some of the elements that are currently available as can be traced to the Madhva tradition. And there are a few very popular the Mathadipatis, the Sannyasis, the Pithadishas. Sri Vyasatirtha of the Vijayanagara, so during the Vijayanagara Empire, so he was the Rajaguru for Sri Krishna Devaraya. And then Sri Raghavendra Tirtha, popularly known as Raghavendra Swami of Mantralaya in the Karnataka Andhra border. And then very recently, Sri Vishweshatirtha Swamiji, who was very popular in the Ram Janmabhoomi movement and understanding the issues of the religious, the modernization of the world, and therefore what challenges does it pose to religion, etc. And was a well-known philosopher and saint here. So those were some of the Swamijis and Mathadipatis well known, who obviously trace their lineage to the Madhva school. So these are some elements from which we can actually trace, or we now know that, okay, there is some school called Madhva school. But my own understanding, or probably of a lot of you who have joined here with an interest to understand, is probably not beyond this much. I mean, except for probably a paragraph in some of the history textbooks that, okay, there were multiple Vedanta schools, one of which was the Dvaita School, and Śrī Madhvācārya founded that. Beyond that, we don't see a lot of details in the popular discourse. So, and for that purpose, I'm actually very thankful to INDICA's initiation to look at diverse approaches that the Indian knowledge systems has produced in looking at Vedantic schools. So, and Śrī Madhva is one of them. So that's the that's how we are trying to frame this context, that there are multiple systems of Vedantic schools, and Śrī Madhvācārya is one of them. Probably not that popularly known, and we're trying to get into that, except for these some factual details that may be of relevance in the society. But beyond that, in terms of the philosophical and other details, not much is known. So that's the reason why we're trying to spend some time to understand about Madhvācārya's life and works. What is it in this philosophy that makes it interesting, or motivates a student of philosophy, or anyone interested in the Indian cultural traditions to actually go into the details of Śrī Madhva's teachings? These are some of the questions that I've just listed, which are not necessarily, obviously, not exhaustive or comprehensive. So these were some of the points that we know from the current social realities and the historical details that may be popularly available to trace or to relate to the Madhva school. However, the more detailed philosophical analysis or the information and an engagement is not what is common in popular discourse, and that's what we're trying to do in this course. So what's the significance or the motivating factor for a student to engage with Madhva school? So these are some of the challenges that I think are common to not only the philosophical schools in the Indic tradition, but globally. Any fundamental philosophical exploration would start with questions like these, right? Who am I? Which can then be extrapolated to talk about the nature of jiva, the nature of Lord, and the nature of moksha. So what do these actually mean, and how do I relate to those ideas? Then the question of, okay, there are multiple schools that talk about different conceptualizations of jiva, the Lord, etc. But what's the relationship between the two of them? I'm broadly calling it the visible and the invisible, because there are schools that take a position to prioritize the visible over invisible, and some that prioritize invisible over the visible. And in fact, if we look at it from the lens of, what is the definition of reality or truth, these different positions actually lead us to schools that talk about realism versus, say, the idealism or the more normative schools. So the relationship between visible and invisible is at the core of how do we bring or bridge the gap between what we are experiencing and what we are conceptualizing and understanding from, say, experience of sages or the teachings of the Vedas. So these two fundamental ontological entities, which is about myself, my own experience, where I stand now and how I understand what is apparent to me, and the other, which is invisible, which is probably what it should be or what really is. So the relationship between these two is at the heart of most of the philosophical discussions. Some would say, well, there is nothing called an invisible, which actually takes us to the atheist or the Gnostica school. Some would say, yes, there is something which is more powerful or invisible, but they're not different from what you are. So that's the broadly the Advaita school. Then there are others who might say, no, what's invisible or what's controlling is fundamentally different from what you are. And that's broadly the Dvaita school. I will talk about the details a little later. But whichever position or understanding you come to, there are obvious other questions that follow. Vedas. So how is it that you're trying to reconcile these, or scientific philosophical position? Or is it the other way around, which is you actually have a philosophical idea or a position that you have, and trying to force fit these evidences. Koteji, if there is any voice or video issue, please let me know, because I'm getting this message that there is some internet instability.
No, we are good, Srinidhi. Please continue.
Yeah. Sure, thank you. So these questions actually raise very, as I said in the beginning, core philosophical questions, and I've just listed some of these dichotomies here. In fact, just about a couple of weeks ago, there was an interesting op-ed piece, I think in the Indian Express, which tried to say that there is a difference between the Western approach to knowledge systems and the Indic approach. And the author was trying to argue that most of the scientific disciplines of the West look at things from the perspective of logos, or what is known, not the gnosis, which is the process of knowing, which is basically trying to situate the individual who is understanding outside of the domain that's being understood. So in other words, there is this question of whether the knower would influence or his or her perception would color the object that's being known. Largely, the understanding of the consensus in the modern scientific world is that the reality should probably be not so much dependent on the person who's. So that's the argument of scientific realism or objectivity, etc. And do these? So what kind of parallels we see in the Indic knowledge systems? Because these actually get translated to mean that my experience can be subjectively different from another person, and therefore the way I conceptualize a philosophical idea can be different from someone else's. Is that the position that Madhvācārya is also trying to take? So these are the questions. So obviously I'm not going to the details of the answers. I mean, these take much more time to engage, but these are the kinds of questions that we will be discussing. So subjective reality versus objective reality, which one do you choose? Sorry for the typo there. then it also translates to a couple of other implications for our real life. So if different individuals perceive dharma, adharma, the reality in different ways, then what does it mean to the prescriptions of what one should do? Can I make a choice depending on my own understanding of the philosophical principles? What does it then mean to a boundary of dharma? And also, are there different set of rules for different objectives? So, for example, you're interested in Trivarga, which is dharma, artha, and kama, versus the question of apavarga, which is moksha, in which case, do we then follow different paths, which was the popular understanding at the time of Śrī Madhvācārya, which he questioned. So, in the sense, the path that the sannyasis would take towards moksha was considered the only option for moksha, or the avenue for moksha. He tried to problematize this question by asking, does it then exclude everyone else who is not pursuing a specific path that the sannyasis would take, or is there something more fundamental which will define the path of dharma at the level of mental frame rather than the specific acts that you do? Of course, the specific acts that you undertake outside of your own realm need to be defined in a boundary, but what's the mental, the frame that defines the path for moksha versus path for others, which can then be universalized? So these are some important questions that any school of Vedanta or otherwise would actually engage. But Madhva school also, and as a core question, engages with these kinds of questions. The reason why I wanted to bring it up at the very beginning is this has implications to a lot of our contemporary analysis and questions we raise in the modern problems. For example, how do you reconcile, say, the Ayurvedic knowledge systems with biomedical thinking? Because the evidence base for one may be different from the other, but does that mean we allow for both these knowledge systems as equally valid in their own realms, or there is some common platform on which we can actually engage with each other? These can be understood only if we have a broad framework that talks about how do you reconcile experience, logic, and text. And that's at the core of Madhva's engagement with the Vedic texts, and constraining them by using established logics and one's experience. The one other question of these dichotomies is the question of principles versus stories, which is an abstraction that I'm trying to make with Vedas and Ramayana, Mahabharata. The Ramayana, Mahabharata, Bhagavata kind of stories are popularly understood as trying to talk mostly about culture or some basic religious or ritualistic ideas, but the Vedas are more at the spiritual domain. So that's the modern understanding. And how does the traditions look at this dichotomy? Or is there any dichotomy? So that's the other interesting question to explore, because the popular perception, again, is that the Vedantas look at the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita mostly, but do not engage with Mahabharata, Ramayana, which are largely at the cultural domain and not at the philosophical domain, is the popular perception. And Madhvācārya takes this question also head on to argue that the Vedic texts or the corpus of knowledge is to be understood as a whole by looking at all of these texts together. And this has implications for our daily actions, because otherwise there is this kind of a disconnect that we have developed in, okay, there are certain things that can be in the domain of spirituality and more fundamental philosophical questions, and others are mostly for our daily actions or culture. So this gap between culture and philosophy can be addressed if we look at the kind of questions and principles that Madhvācārya tries to use while looking at the Ramayana Mahabharata questions. So that's the motivation for why this is an interesting problem for a student of philosophy. Okay? Then how is Madhva's school situated in the broader corpus? I mean, those were the questions that I posed earlier were the more philosophical questions. But in terms of the literature, where do we position this? This is a kind of a framework that I'm trying to develop to situate any school of thought, for that matter, in the Indian knowledge system. So there are, on the left column, you see some texts that are considered the original texts, right? I mean, which is also the Vidyasthana is a term that many Puranas use. I mean, Vishnu Purana lists that there are 14 Vidyasthanas, and some say you need to add 4 more, the Upavedas, to make it 18 Vidyasthanas. But essentially, these are the original texts, the Vedangas, the Vedas, the Vedangas. The Vedas, we know the 4. The Vedangas include, Vyakarana, Shiksha Shastra, the Jyotishya, all of those which help in understanding the Vedas. So in that sense, they are tools to understand the Vedas, and therefore the name Vedangas. Then we have the set, the Itihasa and Purana. The 2 Itihasas, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and Madhvācārya adds another, the Pancharatra. So the 2 are well known, and then the 18 Puranas. So these are the texts that illustrate the principles of the Vedas and others with stories, right? And then you have Dharma Shastras or the Smriti Granthas, which talk about the prescriptions for daily actions. And then so these constitute, the categories vary a little bit. So basically, Itihasa and Purana become 1. And so 4 plus 6, and then 10, and then Itihasa Purana 1, so that's 11, and Dharma Shastra and Smriti is 12. And there are 2 more, which I haven't listed here for the sake for simplicity, that is Nyaya and Mimamsa. Basically, a methodology and an epistemology. We'll talk about that in the course in detail. And then we have 4 Upavedas, the Ayurveda, Gandharva Veda, Dhanurveda. Some include Sthapatya, that's the Shilpa Shastra, or Artha Shastra. There is some difference of opinion on that. But basically, these constitute the core ideas, core texts. Then we need to look at these from the perspective of darshana. So darshanas are in a way, vision, literally speaking, or perspectives that different sages developed as a frame to put all these vidyasthanas together in a theoretical abstraction. So what is it that all of these are telling? What is one fundamental idea based on which or anchoring on which we can understand all of this? Because there is significant diversity, plurality, and a lot of contradictions if we do not get into very sophisticated analytical tools, if we look at vidyasthanas on their own apparently. So obviously it was interesting problem for the rishis to pick one fundamental theme which can tie these together. So different schools of thought actually came with that problem to be addressed. So Sankhya Shastra talked about, for example, classification is more important, the categories, the distinctions. Then yoga talked about, the mind and the control of mind is most important, which is the theme of all of these. The Nyaya said, it's the logic that should be understood as the underlying theme. And if some of you are from, say, social sciences or qualitative research background, would understand what I'm trying to get at, which is, you have a large mass of text, and you want to find one connecting theme, which is the core idea of these. So depending on the lens that you use, you may come up with different solutions. The Vaisheshikas said, it's about the objects, the physical objects. The Pura Mimamsas, that's the Mimamsaka school or the Jaimini school, talked about, the ritual is the underlying theme. the Uttaramimamsa school, also called the Vedanta school, which was the school of Sri Vedavyasa, said, well, it is the Brahman, the Lord, who is the underlying connecting principle for these texts. This is I'm presenting this from the popular understanding of how darshanas are looked at. Śrī Madhvācārya problematizes this and fine-tunes that, well, this distinction is not very accurate in the sense, does it then mean that those who talked about Brahman did not argue for, say, control of mind that the yoga school is talking about, or that they were not logical because they didn't find logic as the underlying thing? So these categories, which are popularly used in describing the Shad Darshanas, is a first step, or a kind of an initial frame just to get an overview. But when we look at it from Madhvācārya's perspective, then there is another interesting relationship between these that emerge. But for a first level understanding, it suffices to say that Uttaramimamsa is one of the themes, or one of the perspectives. Uttaramimamsa, as I said, is synonymously used for Vedanta. So Vedanta Darshana, or Uttaramimamsa Darshana, is one of these darshanas that looked at the Vidyasthanas and tried to abstract the fundamental idea. Now, these Uttaramimamsa sutras, also called the Brahma Sutras that Sri Vedavyasa wrote, had many bhashyas or explanations, commentaries. That's how you have multiple schools. The Advaita Vedanta school is one of them, that was started by Sri Śaṅkarācārya. Then the Viśiṣṭādvaita Vedanta, started by Sri Rāmāmujācārya. So they were all trying to provide an explanation to the Brahma Sutras. So Śrī Madhvācārya also falls in this category, but he was not adhering to the orthodox explanations that were present at that time. So he was questioning some of the existing interpretations of the Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutras, and was trying to reconnect or revive texts, as I said in the beginning, for example, the Mahabharata Ramayana principles that were not seen in the Vedanta interpretations, and try to provide another interpretation for the Uttaramimamsa school, and established what then became known as the Dvaita Vedanta or the Tattvavada. Tattva refers to reality. I mean, this is contrasted against the word Mayavada. The Advaita school is known as Mayavada. This basically, the idea is, how do you conceptualize the reality or the world out there? If you consider that as real, then the question will be how do you explain that reality? If you consider that as an illusion, I mean, I apologize for a wrong translation of the word Maya, because that's not specifically illusion. It is neither real nor unreal. That's how Advaita school defines it. But if we conceptualize world as a product of Maya, then the questions that we ask are, how do we explain why that Maya is behaving the way it is? So then it becomes Mayavada, because the theorization is about Maya. If we conceptualize the world as real, then the questions are why it exists the way it exists. And therefore the theorization is about the tattva, the reality. So therefore it's called realism or tattvavad. So that's how we situate the Madhva school in the broader darshana framework. The questions that would naturally be interesting at this stage is, how did he actually carve out a space within the tradition of the Uttaramimamsa school to develop a new idea, but still adhering to the principles of Vedanta? So what questions did he ask, and how did he approach those questions to come up with a new set of principles? And that's what we will be discussing, and how he actually engaged with the existing schools and developed another idea. Because I mean, I need to spend a minute explaining this, especially looking at how narratives are built in the modern world. I mean, with no disrespect the modern narrative building, if you observe, is looking at what are the ideas that align with my thinking, and I choose those and then build a rhetorical corpus. Okay, I have support from so many texts, so many ideas, and therefore mine should be credible or should be considered legitimate. But that's not how the classical Indian traditions, none of them, Advaita, Dvaita, Nyaya, were developing ideas. They never hesitated to actually engage with a diametrically counter philosophical perspective. I mean, without doing that, the credibility or the strength of your teachings is under question. So it wasn't just okay, I have found some truth, I will just tell you what I have found. And there are multiple views and people can choose whatever they are. That's a little bit of a fashionable modern idea. But that's not how traditional schools were approaching this. And Madhvas was not an exception to that. So he was trying to actually engage with the existing schools and take the explanations the core ideas that those schools were using to establish their teachings and engage with them in a way that they are not running counter to what you are talking. So unless you take into consideration the counterfactuals, the counter evidences, etc., the robustness of your theory is in question. And that's what most schools did. In fact, even today, especially in the South, also in the North till very recently, but continuing even today, are the very rigorous debates of Dvaita Advaita schools, which is basically for this purpose. I mean, faith or belief system in one's daily practice, maybe they may have chosen one for whatever reasons, but the beauty of Indian knowledge systems has always been its openness to actually engage with another tradition, with the openness to such an extent that people were ready to actually engage and convert if they felt that, well, no, that school seems to be more convincing. So this real, robust, rigorous engagement with another school is again a hallmark of most of the Vedanta schools, including that of Madhva. So we'll talk about some of those as to how did he try to interact with the existing schools. So these are some of his works, which beyond this slide, I won't be able to go into the details today. So he wrote the commentaries directly on some texts. As I said, something interesting to note here is the Brahma Sutra, the Bhagavata, the Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads are considered the Prasthana Traya. This is what constitutes an interesting, the triad for the Vedantins. But he went further to actually write a commentary on Bhagavata. We don't see a Vedantin writing that, or a Matacharya, a founder of a school, doing a very, engaging with the Puranas and the Mahabharata to such an extent. So that's an interesting addition. And he also wrote a very comprehensive analytical work called Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, which engages with questions such as, why did Rama do what he did in Ramayana, and how is it justified? The controversial matters that we see in the Mahabharata war, for example, whether it was right for Arjuna to kill Karna in the way he did, etc., etc. I mean, what is the idea of 5 husbands for Draupadi? So all these questions that are current and the younger generations would ask as to, well, we find it a little puzzling to understand these stories. So he actually engages with these questions and provides a response from the textual traditions. And there are also works that talk about the Dharma Shastras. There are some that are small, short works, not extending beyond even half a page, that are called Prakaranas. There are a couple of stotras, and also one Yamaka Kavya, which uses the same syllables, the same words in verse multiple times. So in terms of the literary beauty, it's one of the classics. So we will talk about these works in detail. So I'll one quick word about some basic tenets. So this is a classical verse used to summarize Śrī Madhvācārya's tenets. Śrīman Madhvamate Harih Parataraha. So he talked about the supremacy of Lord Vishnu. So it's a Vaishnava school. Hari Parataraha. Satyam Jagat Tattvataha. The world is in fact absolutely real. Tattvataha Satyam. Bhinnaha Jivaganaha. All souls are individually different. Harer Anucharaha. They all are under, so they need control of the Lord. Nichocha Bhavangataha. There is an internal, intrinsic hierarchy in terms of one's ability. Bhaktihi Naija Sukhanu Muktihi Naija Sukhanubhutihi. That's a typo there. It should have been Muktihi. So what is moksha? So experiencing one's inner bliss, which is core to one's identity, even though they are different for each individual. Amala bhaktischa tat sadhanam. And the way to attain that is a pure devotion to the Lord. Akshadi tritayam pramanam. And there are three fundamental sources of knowledge: perception, logic, and the texts, the Vedas and the allied texts. Akhilam nayayika vedyo harihi. And the main message or the summary of all texts, each word and letter of these texts talk about Lord Narayana. So those are his core tenets, and we will discuss what questions do these actually raise. I'll not go into these details, or we'll talk about them in the course. So we will start with a brief overview of the basic tenets and his biography, use his life history to anchor the other sessions, and understand the idea of, apti. Apti means reliability or legitimacy. Why should one believe whatever he's saying? So what's the context in which these works were written? Some stories that are documented in the biography that talk about the divine personality and the yogic powers of Madhva. But again, so I need to provide this caveat. Madhvācārya himself makes this point multiple times, that one's so-called miracles or divine personality, etc., are not a guarantee to the correctness of his teachings, right? I mean, then it becomes very difficult for anybody to actually logically analyze what's going on. So though it might add another layer of confidence, that's not a proof in itself. So we will use this biographical details with this caveat in mind. And some tenets we will talk in detail. So the biography talks about his birth, his spiritual inclination in childhood, and how he took sannyasa, and the kinds of questions that he was asking at the beginning, and the Tirtha Yatra that he does, and the meeting Lord Vedavyasa at Badri, then the different other stories in the creation of works, and his personality and disappearance. So these are some of the sources. I have listed them in the web page, the books that can be of interest and use for people who want to go into the details beyond what we may be discussing in the course. There are a couple of movies. So the idea at the end is that we should be able to appreciate Śrī Madhvācārya's approach of reconciling the entire gamut of the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Gita, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, the Mahabharata, the Purana, in one theme, and recognize ways to reflect on experience, core philosophical questions, and look at Vedic wisdom as a whole. And how do we understand one, connecting theme? And of course, I mean, these might seem little theoretical activities if we stop there. So we have to obviously look at what does it mean to one's life. As most of you would agree, this is the core difference between the Western and the Indic knowledge systems. We are not looking at knowledge as something out there which does not have any implication or a prescriptive value to me. So we look at the insights and the theoretical frame in a way that informs what it means to an individual for the questions of what is dharma and what is dharmic life. So that's the goal and the hopeful outcome. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was quite an engaging overview. It went to more than an overview also, and I'm sure the audience members would have really benefited. I just wanted, there's a question by Krishna Chaitanya ji in the Q&A box, if you could address that.
Yeah, so correct. So like many other traditions, the Dvaita school also traces the tradition beyond Madhvācārya also, in the sense Śrī Madhva took sannyasa from Śrī Achyuta or Achyuta Prajñācārya, who's his guru, and then there is a lineage that the tradition recognizes, which goes back to the the Mahabharata period, the Durvasa, the Hamsa Namaka, Vishnu, etc. But so the reason then why is Madhvācārya called the founder? In fact, in the tradition, the term used is punah pratisthapana. So the ideas of Dvaita school were lost in the or they weren't in popular use and were not understood in the way they probably existed many centuries ago. So it was a kind of that's the reason why I use the word revival. So at that time, historically, he was the person who started it with no one else having that same exact thought at that moment in time. And so there is an unbroken tradition from then onwards in terms of the thoughts. But the sannyasa tradition does exist even earlier to him. And so, as I said, even traceable to the Mahabharata times, etc. And also, that is necessarily the case for all of these Vedantic traditions, because the source of legitimacy cannot come from the founder. You can't say that, well, I'm saying this and therefore somebody needs to accept this, because there is a requirement in terms of the traditional source of legitimacy that it should be traceable to the original sources of text. So if the texts existed and if this is the interpretation that you're giving, logically there must have been people prior to you who actually thought similar to you. So therefore, started is more in terms of temporally at that point in time, he restarted. That may be the better word.
There's another question by Subramaniam. First, there's a question by Krishna ji, then Subramaniam ji has asked a question.
Does that mean Anumana, Upamana, Arthapatti, and Anupalabdhi are not considered as valid methods of knowledge as per Dvaita school? Well, not really. What I meant was, and Anupalabdhi are all considered part of Anumana, though Anupalabdhi can sometimes go into Pratyaksha or Agama. So he was not dismissing them, but the categorization was questioned. They could have been better categorized, so that was the answer. What does the number 4 in the brackets for Brahma Sutras indicate? That the Bhashyam was written only are 4 sutras? No, sorry. Okay, I should have explained that. There are 4 works that Madhvācārya wrote on Brahma Sutras. And there are 2 works that he wrote on Bhagavad Gita. So the 4 works on Brahma Sutra were actually, the one was an elaborate commentary or the more classic commentary called the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. Then he had a sub-commentary to his own work, which was explaining some of the intricate details that are more philosophical in nature. So that was called Anuvyakhyana. And then he wrote a summary text, which is just about 32 verses, called Anubhashya. And then there was another work called Nyaya Vivarana, which talks about extracting the logic from each adhikarana of Brahma Sutra. What is the Purvapaksha idea and what is the Siddhanta idea? So those were the 4 different works that he wrote with different goal or an objective, but all of them were commentaries on the Brahma Sutras, and 2 on Bhagavad Gita. One was a bhashya, and another is a tatparya. So one looking at more literal interpretation, and the second is looking at, okay, what is it that we understand if we look at, say, 4 or 5 verses together? What's the message? So that's the tatparya. Okay, then there is a question: in the light of Nobel Prize in Physics for 2022 for proving world is not real, how to go about reinforcing Dvaita philosophy? Okay, I think I should probably post an article written by a good friend. I think published recently in Resonance, which is the journal that the Indian Academy of Sciences here in Bangalore so where this question is actually addressed, and the point is the notion of reality that the quantum physics is talking, and the notion of reality that Dvaita or Advaita speak about are fundamentally different. So it is a little bit of a superficial interpretation that's going on. To use the word from a completely different context, which is in the world of quantum physics, where the term reality has a very different connotation from the word reality in the Vedanta schools, whether it is in Advaita or in Dvaita. So the notion of mithya that Advaita talks about is not the same as the notion of non-locally real, etc., that quantum physics talks about. And similarly, the reality that quantum physics talks about is not the same when situated with the satya of the Dvaita school. So they are 2 different ideas. So that question does not arise. How do we go about? I think that was the same question, probably. Reinforcing Dvaita philosophy is again.
So if the audience has any other questions, we would encourage you to post in the Q&A box. We are at 6:55 p.m. So we're about to close the session. There is something that has been posted.
Okay, so there is another last. Yeah, I think there is one other last question. So we are nowhere near the convergence of Vedanta with the Western thought. Is it? No, that's not the point I'm trying to make. The term real is used in a different context. That's all. The discussion of so to say that quantum physics is talking about real or non-real, and therefore that has implications to Dvaita Advaita debate, is where I'm saying is a superficial transposition or an imposition of an idea that's not the point of contention in the Dvaita Advaita debates. But the Western thought and the debate with the Vedanta is surely possible, and that's the question that we have when it comes to how do you reconcile experience, logic, or the Vedic domains. And also, I personally am a little uncomfortable to use the word Western thought when it comes to science, because I mean, it's not about the West or the East when it is about science. I mean, it is one approach to look at world, and there are specific ways of looking at it. And if there is a conflict to any other knowledge tradition, then we have to engage and see what's the evidence and which evidence makes it more convincing for an individual. And that's the question of the objective or the subjective truth that I started off with. And if we do subscribe to the question of objective reality, then we have different implications and solutions possible.
Thank you, Srinidhi. There was a request from Subramanya-ji about the article. So I have responded to him saying that the mail that we sent with the recording of today's session, we will include a link to that, so that, or maybe as an attachment, we'll do that so that it benefits everybody else. He had said that he wants you to share with him. So let it be a collective sharing and learning. So we'll do that. Yeah. With this, we are at 6:58 p.m. There is one Yes, we got it, Subramanyamji. We will make sure that the Indian Academy of Sciences article is shared in the email that we send to everybody with the recording of today's webinar. So with that, we come to the close of this open session. We look forward to your enrollment and participation in the live sessions. The course begins from the 13th of June. The classes will be on Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. And I'm sure that there is a whole host of information and awareness waiting for the learners who enroll. We've got excellent feedback from the first batch that we offered, and Srinidhi was our faculty, of course. So we look out time on a Saturday evening, no less, to participate. And Srinidhi, thanks a lot. We really look forward to an excellent session again from the 13th of June. The recording will be shared with everybody. So if you have any questions that you feel could not get addressed today, please feel free to write to us at reachout@indica.courses, and we'll make sure that we get back to you as soon as possible. With that, we look forward to the next overview webinar session, which will be on the 20th of May at 6 p.m. This will be on the Sanskrit for Beginners batch that we have to offer. Till then, namaste, have a great weekend and a wonderful week ahead. Namaste.
Namaste, Dimple ji. Namaste.